Hearing stream 1 on the Napier City proposed district plan has resumed after lunch. Thank you. We have before us, perhaps online, or is it just you, Anna?
I'm Anna Wilkes, Chief Environment and Sustainability Officer from Ravensdown, and there's my colleague Carmen Taylor from Plans Consultants online.
Great, thank you. And we're due to hear from you again on Wednesday as well, aren't we?
That's correct,
Right.
yes.
Okay.
I'll be online on Wednesday.
Okay. Well, we've read your pre-circulated statements, so thank you very much for that. So other than that, the ball is in your park.
All right. Would you like me to just take you to the key matters,
Yes, that would
which
be
I'm
helpful.
happy to do?
Yep.
So the primary matter before us today relates to the ability for Ravensdown to continue to operate effectively and efficiently whilst located in an industrial zone. So turning to my paragraphs 4.1 through to 4.6. And Ms Taylor can speak to this a little bit more comprehensively from a planning perspective, but our Napier Works out at Awatoto is located appropriately in the general industrial zone, and we don't consider, as currently notified, that the proposed district plan provides for the continued effective operation of heavy industry in the area. And that particularly relates to the requirement for a non-complying land use activity consent for any expansion of our activities on the site. And I want to make the point that it's not that we're opposed to the need to manage appropriately effects from heavy industrial activities, but a non-complying activity status on expansion within an industrial zone seems to be a little heavy-handed from our perspective. And I have noted there that we do support the need for off-site environmental impacts to be appropriately managed. That's really the summation of the main point I want to make. I'm happy to pass to either take questions from you or pass to Ms Taylor to speak from a planning perspective.
Okay, well, we'll pass to Ms Taylor and then open up for questions. Okay, thank you. Oh. Not looking good, is it?
She was there.
Wait a second. Right. Well, while we were waiting, he said, any questions for Ms. Wilkes?
No, only for Ms Taylor.
Right. Yes, me too. So we'll just hang fire.
All right. Hope she can.
On technology. Can we text her? Let her know? All right. Can I ask, while we're waiting, is there a lot of room at Ravensdown to expand? How large is the site compared to the development?
We do have some space. It's unlikely that we will be seeking to expand on a large scale.
Right.
You may be aware that Ravensdown currently operates 3 superphosphate manufacturing sites, one here, one in Christchurch and one in Dunedin, and as of the end of January, the manufacturing side of our business in Dunedin will cease.
Right.
What that means for Napier is, rather than any sort of pressure on specific need to expand, but more reliance on our ability to continue to operate in Napier. Any sort of expansion would not be in terms of intensity of operation, but more reconfiguration of existing. We're continually looking to upgrade and improve the facilities on site to reduce our environmental impact. And so and those things typically happen in a not so much a piecemeal fashion, but they're staged. And so it's trying to minimise the need for, trying to be careful not to say too onerous a consenting regime with what is effectively a reconfiguration of existing infrastructure on the site.
Okay, that's useful. Thank you. Ms Taylor, can you hear us now? No, we can see you, but we can't hear you.
Apologies, I can hear you now.
We can hear you, but only just. So, don't know if that's your end or our end.
Is that any better?
A little bit better.
A little bit better.
Just tell her to keep going. I'll just keep turning it up.
Okay, if you keep going, we'll do what we can our end.
Is that better? I have to put my volume up.
I think we can hear you all. Yep. Yep. Nods all around. So, go for it. So, yes, we're just looking for a summary of your statement that we have read.
So I understand Ms Wilkes just gave you an overview of Ravensdown's interest in what's the topic of this hearing. The summary is, the key point is really contained in paragraph D of my summary, where I say that we want an amendment to the explanation to the UFDI issue 4, just to recognise that there is existing larger scale and heavy industrial activity in the region that should be provided for in terms of an ability to expand and intensify. Having said that, as traversed in section 3 of my evidence, we recognise that there are limited suitable land and various other constraints in Napier City itself, whereby new heavy industry or larger scale industry should be encouraged to locate outside of the city. It's just key is to get that balance, recognising that there is heavy industry in the city and that it shouldn't be constrained from continuing to operate effectively. And so the amendment to the explanation I've requested is in paragraph 3.9 of my evidence and also in Appendix B. And one part of that is making sure that any existing larger scale or heavy industry that does intensify or expand can be suitably serviced. And in terms of the Napier Works, they're self-sufficient for water supply and wastewater at this time, and that in accordance with resource consents held from Hawke's Bay Regional Council.
Okay. So, do you want some questions from the panel?
If you've got any.
just one. I don't know if you heard, but I asked Ms Wilkes around what the plans were for if there's room for expansion, and she gave the answer would be more a reconfiguration rather than intensifying. But in your paragraph 3.9, you use the words intensify and expand.
You could include reconfigure as well, or some other sort of word that reflects the intent of not unduly constraining heavy industry, existing heavy industry.
I think I'm being a pedant. It is. I think reconfigure would fit in with intensify and expand. If you did a reconfiguration, would it be treated as, or meet that policy, the way it's worded?
You mean the explanation to the issue, as I've suggested? I consider intensify and expand means more than is already there, whereas a reconfigure is move things around.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
The other way you could do it, not unduly constrained.
And I suppose the other thing too, this is, and I had to admit this is at a strategic level, so it has to be fairly general. But you are particularly interested in the site at Awatoto, not generally throughout all industrial zones in terms of heavy industry.
I'm preparing my evidence, obviously. I've focused on the Napier Works in terms of my thinking, but I just think from a planning perspective, if you've got industrial zones, then you should provide for the activities in those zones to operate effectively. And that's for all industrial activities in industrial zones.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions?
No.
Yeah. Now, Ms Taylor, I've just got 4 issues I'd like to address you on. The first one's at your paragraph 4.6.
Is that not tomorrow, Wednesday's hearing? We were split up with the strategic direction today, and then the HAS subs and activities on surface water on Wednesday. But if you want us to do them, we can. Talk about them.
Hang on a minute.
Just to clarify, so your part 2 of your evidence, that's for the Wednesday.
Yeah, we're booked at 10:50, I think.
Yeah.
But obviously, Anna's in the room if you've got questions, and we don't need to appear on Wednesday. We'd be happy.
Okay.
Well, yeah, we've got a slightly different panel on Wednesdays.
Yeah, that's what I understood.
We need to.
All right, so I'll save 3 of those questions until Wednesday. Apologies for that. But I do have a question then in relation to today's matter, the issue the Chair was just discussing with you. And if I take you to your Appendix B then,
Yes.
and it seems to me that amendments that you're requesting to the explanation are actually inconsistent with the issue as written. I mean, there's been no recommended or sought changes to the issue. And your explanation is looking to expand that issue beyond what the plain wording currently says. So I guess I'm looking for you to persuade me why any amendments to the explanation are justified at all.
Remember, this is identified as an issue, and it's an explanation to the issue that we're seeking to change. I supported the relevant objectives and policies for urban form and development and don't seek any further changes to those. So, for example, Objective 4 and Objective 6, and then Policy 3 and Policy 8, beyond those recommendations from the staff recommended report. The issue as drafted itself is a statement of fact, and I see no problem with that. In terms of the changes to the explanation, I'm just seeking a bit more clarity about fact, I suppose, and the fact that you do have existing larger scale and new industry and larger scale and heavy industry and industrial zones in the city, and they shouldn't be forgotten, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, but with respect, the amendment that you're seeking goes beyond what the issue actually says. The issue is Napier's limited land area means there's limited opportunities for industrial growth. The amendments you're seeking to the explanation are to explicitly provide for industry to intensify and expand, which is a form of growth. That's totally inconsistent with the issue as stated.
I'm seeking changes to provide context that industrial growth refers to the new industrial growth.
Yeah.
And if you read the issue in the context of, oh no, there's other issues. No, forget what I was going to say there.
I guess my question to you is, as a planning practitioner, do you agree that the explanation should actually explain the issue as written?
Yes.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So no further questions. Thank you.
Any other questions from the panel?
No.
Okay. Okay, well, thank you very much for attending, and we'll see you again on Wednesday. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now we have Hawke's Bay Regional Council. Mr. Meredith and Ms. Nicholson. Oh, welcome.
Kia ora.
Kia ora.
Nice to see some friendly faces on the other side of the table for once.
You should, my friend.
Well, mostly friendly.
We're still dealing with Tank, right? So
Okay, so we have had some pre-circulated statements. Thank you for that. Other than that, the floor is yours. Is there any particular order or manner you want to?
I've just got a brief summary sort of statement, 2-page thing to read if you'd like.
Okay, yep, and you got copies?
I do, yep.
Okay, cool. If we can get hold of that, that'd be great. We need to annotate them or whatever.
Hi, thank you.
Thank you for that.
Good afternoon. So there's a trio here, people to present a statement, submission on behalf of the Hawke's Bay Regional Council. This is not expert evidence today.
No.
It might come in future hearing streams. So on my left, I've got Bryce Cullen, who's the Transport Strategy and Policy Advisor. My name is Gavin Ide. I'm Principal Advisor in Strategic Planning. And to my right is Nicola Nicholson, Manager of the Policy and Planning Team at the Hawke's Bay Regional Council. So, as Chair, as you alluded to, we had provided a 10-page earlier.
You can you twist it? Sure.
Yep.
I was, made that mistake.
Yeah. We had provided a 10-page submission statement on Stream 1 on the 22nd of October. I understand you've been running your eyes across that already, just going by some of the questions you've posed to the reporting officers. So this today is just a really shortened verbal presentation on many of those points. We reiterate that the reporting officer has recommended a number of the Regional Council submissions points to be accepted, and we certainly encourage the panel to adopt those to the extent that they can. We've got half a dozen points here that just want to elaborate on. First one is, surely the panel knows that Napier City Council has an intention to publicly notify 2 variations, maybe 3 variations, 2 of which are of particular interest to the Regional Council. That is around natural hazards and ecosystems and Indigenous biodiversity. As you know, neither of those submissions have been publicly notified as yet. This, we think, makes it challenging to understand how the strategic directions chapter of the PDP hangs and connects with 2 crucial chapters in the proposed district plan that are currently empty, and the associated definitions. So we think it's premature to finalise relevant strategic directions, i.e. what's on before you this week, relating to those matters and how they integrate with the other topics. So we covered that off in paragraph 2.2 of our 10-page statement. One of the other topics was ecologically significant water. We understand the panel has asked reporting officers a question around that expression, and it's a point that we had raised in our earlier statement. We did offer a suggested alternative wording for that. We understand the reporting officer has responded with a slightly different suggestion for amending the Objective 4. Although the reporting officer's response appears to overlook the territorial authority's remit around managing land uses and its impacts on water, the reporting officer tends to focus on Section 32 and Regional Council's roles and responsibilities. Nevertheless, we think the reporting officer's recommendation is reasonably well aligned with our alternative wording. So the rationale might not be spot on, but the net result of amendments to words in the plan are about right. In terms of urban form and development, highly productive land was one of the topics. We understand the panel has asked for further advice from reporting officers about the proposed district plan's use of these terms that relate to productive land, soils, versatile land, and various other combinations. Our submission and statement had highlighted inconsistency of terminology within the provisions of the PDP's strategic directions chapter, but also elsewhere throughout the district plan too. Our statement, 10-page statement, had also raised the matter about the types of a growth strategy intended by the National Policy Statement for Highly Productive Land, and we welcome the panel's question to reporting officers around what was their intention behind that. We encourage the panel to certainly adopt our alternative amendments that we have put forward in terms of Urban Form Development Issue 6, Objective 7 and Policy 3. We think that's offering up clearer wording and intent than what was in the notified version. And just for the panel's own clarity, the Hawke's Bay Regional Council has not yet publicly notified a change to the regional policy statement to include maps of highly productive land in our region. Mm-hmm. The NPS for highly productive land currently requires the Regional Council and all other regional councils in the country to publicly notify such maps before October 2025. However, the government has previously signalled an intention to amend the NPS for highly productive land to remove LUC, Land Use Capability Classification 3, from the meaning of highly productive land. That intention signalled by the government presents an uncertain timeline for our own highly predictive land mapping work in Hawke's Bay and in other regions too. It's unfortunate, but it is what it is. In terms of natural hazards, we have offered an alternative amendment to Objective 2 that has a clearer reference to significant risk of natural hazards. Just a subtle rewording there, but we think that better aligns with the intention and words used in Section 6H of the RMA, rather than the reporting officer's expression which introduces the term of significant increase in risk. We think, on that basis, we urge the panel to adopt our alternative recommendation, alternative amendment to Objective 2, rather than the reporting officer's recommendation. Turning to transport and infrastructure, we've suggested some alternative amendments to the PDP's meaning of significant infrastructure and transport network. That's before you in our statement. We would encourage the panel to adopt our recommendations in that regard. We think these amendments would enhance the PDP in a number of ways, particularly because it provides for the wider transport system, and I emphasise the system here, which includes local roads, airport and port. And the amendments would also recognise that works and infrastructure provided by councils for the mitigation of natural hazards, some of which is governed by a range of other legislation, Soil Conservation Rivers Control Act, to name but one. Then there's the new latest, greatest publication of the Regional Land Transport Plan. HBRC considers that it would be useful to align the relevant provisions in the PDP's strategic direction section with the strategic objectives and priorities of the recent RLTP, which was adopted earlier this year. The RLTP was finalised in July. That was after the PDP was publicly notified, so it's just a sequencing kind of hiccup there. We think this hearing and the remainder of the deliberation processes offers the opportunity for you to look to how the PDP provisions could realign with the latest current version of the Regional Land Transport Plan. And if the panel wishes, Bryce is here to elaborate on some of the key features and objectives and priorities outlined in that 2024 to 2034 RLTP as it was adopted. And lastly, thank you for the opportunity to be heard, present our submission today. Without doubt, we will be reappearing before you or various versions of your panel in the next couple of hearing streams. Thank you. Kia ora.
Thank you very much. Turning to the panel for any questions.
Yep. Thank you, Mr. Ryder. I've got a number of questions for you. Your first question arises at your paragraph 4.1 of your pre-circulated statement. And I just noticed that you refer there in the text to SDSRCCO2, but did you mean SDUFDO2?
Quite possibly, yes. Yep.
All right. So that's just a reference area. But in terms of the wording, given the nature of Napier and it's subject to a range of natural hazards, earthquakes, flooding, tsunami, what areas within Napier could actually ever be located away from a significant risk of natural hazards? Are there any such areas at all that actually exist?
I would suggest that that comes down to what is or isn't significant, what is or isn't considered by our community to be tolerable, intolerable, all those sorts of things. So there's a qualitative judgment there to be exercised, and it's beyond me to make that call, or beyond any before you today.
Just when I read your paragraph 4.6, I just had a little bit of trouble understanding what you meant there. Could you just explain, maybe in some sort of lay terms, what you meant there regarding your concern about significant increase in risk?
My understanding is Section 6H of the RMA talks about, or references areas at risk of, areas at significant risk of natural hazards.
Sorry, could you say that again?
My recollection is that Section 6H of the RMA refers to areas at significant risk of natural hazards. Which, let's say that's the level of significant risk is here. We think that the reporting officer's little turn on words is saying where there is an increase in risk, is that or is that not a significant increase? Not what was the significant risk to begin with that you're trying to manage, but rather what's the increase and the severity of that increase. As we say, it's subtle but important because it does risk, to avoid, sorry, no pun intended, it does pose the challenge of stepping away from good, clear alignment with Section 6H terminology.
Yeah. 4.21. In terms of the suggested amendment there, which is the text in red font, except where there are permanent or long-term constraints, that's to clause B. So if I was reading that as a decision maker, I'd think, well, what does that mean? What are these permanent or long-term constraints? Are you able to consider coming back to us with some expanded wording that would provide better guidance to a decision maker?
Could, but all decisions across the country are faced with that same wording as it's already used in the NPS for highly productive land. So the national direction currently uses that expression, or very similar to it. Merely what we were trying to do is import the NPS's own words into the district plan at this point.
So would it be more useful to say, except where there are permanent or long-term constraints as outlined in the NPS HPL, or as actually to refer to a document that a decision maker can gain some proper guidance from?
That could be a possibility, yeah.
Yep. So
If
can
the
you
panel
think of
thinks
some
that
wording
there's a
there?
cross-reference back up the food chain to
Yep.
the higher order document.
Yes, maybe you could just think about that. I'm not wanting to be critical. I just look at the words on their face and I think, well, what does it actually mean? What are they wanting me to do as a decision maker? So if you can provide some more clarity along those lines or others, that would be appreciated.
So can I ask, through you, Chair, what does that feedback look like? Time-wise, format?
Yes, well, previously
Protocols.
today, we've just asked how short a time frame can you turn that request around? If it can be done very quickly, that's all the better, because then it gives council officers time to respond as well. So I don't
week
think
or
that should
two?
be onerous. Yeah, a week or so.
Just right,
Well,
time-wise, that's easy.
yeah.
Timing-wise, is it just a simple email or?
Oh, look,
Another
just an email with an
statement?
attached Word document to our hearings administrator would be fine.
Great.
We don't want to make it overly
Yeah,
complicated. You don't need a formal memorandum or anything
No.
explaining it. You just say, the Commissioner asked a question, we've given it some thought, here's our
Goes well.
response. Yeah.
Thank you.
That's cool.
Just a couple more. Paragraph 5.3. So there you're suggesting amendments to the definition of significant infrastructure, and I was quite interested in G. Is all local roading infrastructure significant?
Yeah. I'll just view it.
For instance, I can imagine an arterial road or a collector road might be significant, but not every street on Napier Hill is necessarily significant in terms of the definition of significant infrastructure.
Yeah, look, I think there's definitely a valid point in that. I think really what we were trying to get at there is if we think about the transport system as a whole, there's a lot of interdependencies that exist within that system, be it obvious or nuanced. The example of the streets in Napier Hill, for example, you would probably say is more nuanced. You'd look at them, they're, small residential streets that don't have much fanfare or activity going on. But if, for example, a tsunami or an earthquake happens and a whole lot of people are evacuated up to the hill, that part of the transport system all of a sudden becomes very significant and very important. A lot of other examples of significant infrastructure, like the port, for example, the key roads to that, clearly significant. Some of the local roads that connect to those are also significant.
Yeah. I guess my concern is there's a number of provisions in the district plan that are probably more enabling or more protective of significant infrastructure. I just wasn't sure that should apply to all local roading. So I just invite you to maybe give that some thought.
Sure.
And see whether that term local could be maybe just further expanded or constrained a bit.
We could potentially look at aligning that with One Network Framework classifications, for example, as that obviously has different classes of roads and different classifications.
Yeah, that'd be helpful. That was the sort of thing I was thinking of. So if you're happy to do that, just give us some words to consider and for the officers to consider.
Sure.
Just some options. Great. Just a couple more. So the next question, there's only two more. 5.6, just your requested amendment there to include the airport and the port and to redefine transport network into transport system. Does that have any consequential effects on the transport provisions in the plan, the transport chapter itself? Have you thought through that?
Yes, it does to an extent, but not a material one when it comes to investment. So, as to my earlier point with the transport system, there's a lot of interdependencies and interrelationships that rely on each other. And I guess if I just take a step back, where a lot of this came from when we were developing the Regional Land Transport Plan, and I'm not sure how familiar everyone is with the process, but they're meant to be 10-year plans reviewed every 3 years, and this was meant to be a review cycle, but of course with the cyclone and the impacts that had, we decided to basically rewrite it. And what we saw during the cyclone is that our transport system regionally is at the limit of its durability. State Highway 2 North was closed for over 3 months. State Highway 5 was closed for about 5 to 6 weeks. Napier was isolated for quite a period of time. And so having key infrastructure in areas that, for all intents and purposes, should an event happen, and that system fails, that cuts a lot of communities off. So even if it's something such as an active transport network, for example, what if that becomes the only alternative mode of transport if all of the bridges are out? So it's just kind of recognising a lot of those interdependencies that exist, irrespective of asset ownership within the wider system. They all sort of have to talk to each other.
Yeah, I guess I was more thinking along the lines of, obviously, the wording transport network, that's fairly common terminology used in district plans, and certain policies and rules would apply to the transport network. And I was just wondering if you thought, had you thought about how would those provisions work if they were applied to the Napier Port, for example? Like, does it create any issues down into the detail of the plan?
As far as my understanding of district plans go, it shouldn't. I mean, for all intents and purposes, Napier Port is a commercial entity, and they will, kind of do what they do. They do, of course, have a significant interest in the transport system and to an extent the local transport network. So,
all right,
as a commercial operator, they would be keen to make sure it's all tied up.
Okay, no, that's helpful. And then to the officers, can you just address that same question in your response to us, please? Just interested in potential unforeseen consequences of the wording thought. And there may not be any, that'd be great, but if there are, I would like to know what they are. And just the last question is again 5.8. And again, just looking at the words that you're seeking. So in terms of supporting future growth. I think that's fairly clear on its face. The words resilience to future risk, what does that mean? Risk of what?
Great question. So that was a key thing that we actually considered in developing the Regional Land Transport Plan, and to the extent that the Regional Transport Committee got to the point where, of course, resilience was a hot topic and something that was discussed quite significantly, and we just pushed pause for a minute and said, well, what do we mean when we say resilience from a transport system context? And particularly looking at lessons learned post-cyclone, it became quite evident that resilience was quite broad. We do have a definition of resilience that the Regional Transport Committee came up with in the RTC. I'm happy to email that later, but just off the top of my head, we looked at resilience to future risk being any kind of risk. So that could be natural hazards, that could be changes in demand, that could be changes in land use, changes in policy, changes in funding, changes in the political environment. So it's effectively to say transport system investment and infrastructure needs to be fit for form and function for future generations. So it's kind of lifting it above a lot of that stuff as much as is practical and possible.
Yeah. Okay, so that's a helpful explanation. Again, can you give some thought to whether or not that can be put down in words so that a decision maker would look at it and say resilience to future risk? I know what that means. And you could say including but not limited to some of the things you've just enunciated to us.
Sure.
Yeah. And I guess responsiveness to a changing climate, I mean, that's just the normal range of potential adverse effects that are going to result from climate change. So. All right, now that's the end of my questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions from the panel? Just one. For an out-of-towner, where are things at with the future development strategy at the moment? And what's the plan for the plan?
Napier Hastings Future Development Strategy is an endeavour between the three partner councils, Napier Hastings and the Hawke's Bay Regional Council. Joint committee has been formed, and just last week before, that joint committee has signed off on a draft FDS that's being referred back to the three respective councils for their adoption and hopefully endorsement in the coming weeks to be then released for public consultation as a Local Government Act special consultative process. If that all goes well, we would have public submissions occurring this side of Christmas and then rolling into hearings and decisions, or deliberations and decisions, Q2 of 2025.
I know you can't give us details, but do you think there's a strong likelihood that the FDS would see requirements to change the Napier proposed plan as a consequence, in broad terms? Will it lead to another variation, in other words?
Yeah, I was just going to say, in terms of scope of the PDP that's in front of you today, that's one thing. In terms of what further changes by variations or whatnot might be necessary further down the planning horizon, that's all to play out in the coming months, I guess.
Okay. And just in terms of your point around the FDS is not the same or vice versa as a growth strategy, which is the term been recommended for officers. I was just trying to understand what your replacement or rewording would be around that. Or are you saying it shouldn't have any reference to growth strategies or anything like that?
My recollection is that, like I touched on earlier about long-term constraints reference, it's wording that we have attempted to put in front of you as an import from the National Policy Statement itself, as
so no
unclear, ambiguous as that National Policy Statement language is. It was all we were trying to do is bring it through to the proposed district plan.
Okay, and that's the other side of your recommendation, not to use the word growth strategy in there.
There was an intention by us to have some deliberate alignment with the wording used in the district plan to the actual language of the NPS itself.
Because from my memory, I haven't got it in front of me, but the NPSUD does provide for councils to allow for, say, rezoning if it's in line with something like a growth strategy.
Correct.
Because
Yep.
different councils use different terminology around the country. So it's used sort of as some generic term that sort of, if they've got something similar, they can use that. But that's on an interim basis until, further work is done with FDSs and things.
Yep.
Okay. All right, I don't have any further questions, thank you. Oh, we have one more question.
Kia ora, I have a very minor question. Just as a non-planner, is there a difference between a network or what is the difference between a network and a system?
Another great question. So I guess to put it at a summary level, a network would be, if you almost think of it like Lego, right? Blocks that sort of stick together and they all connect to build something, whereas a system has a lot of other contingent parts. So if we take that same Lego analogy, it wouldn't be blocks stacking together, it would be a series of blocks stacking together that would form one building or one destination or something and linking them up. So in a transport system context, you obviously have a roading network within that, and that connects people with places, but you also have other pieces of transport system infrastructure, such as a port or an airport, that require a lot of interdependencies for them to all work as they need to. So, for example, export apples need to get from Whakatū to the port to then go from the port to their destination. A system is required for that, not simply a network. So it's just reflecting that integrated nature of all of those different modes and types of transport.
And just to follow up, is that the wording that we've used in the regional land transport policy?
Yes, we've said system.
Okay. Thank you.
Right, thank you, and thank you very much for attending today, and we'll see you in the future, no doubt. Yeah. Now, Ms. Moon, would you like to join us? Thank you. We're running a little bit late, but that's all right. And we've seen your pre-circulated statement, so thank you very much for that. That was helpful. I'll just find it here.
So, sorry, your comment just then,
Yep.
are you not expecting me to read?
No. I just would appreciate it if you just talk to your main points that you'd like to make, because we have seen your
That wasn't.
that thing.
I did email someone at the council, and that wasn't the information I was given, so I was expecting to read. Oh, sorry.
That's all right. No.
I was expecting to read rather than, I haven't
Talk to-
prepared to just.
No, that's fine. If please read us.
Okay.
Your statement. That's fine.
Right, okay, well, I'll first start with thanking you all for being here to listen to me and to provide some context for my submission. I'm going to read a few points from the secondary document that I sent you, which was actually initially provided in 2021 to the beginning of the district plan process. First and foremost, before we make decisions about land use and allocation, which are at the core of the district plan as I understand, I believe that we need to reimagine land, the concept of ownership, and what, as human beings, our true relationship is with land. What makes sense to me is that land is something that exists in and of itself as part of the wider web of life or biosphere. Fundamentally, if we want to use the term ownership, land owns us, not the other way around. I base this on the truth that land can exist without us, whilst we cannot exist without land. This is also true for in connection with water and air and atmosphere. To understand our true relationship with land, we can turn for help to Indigenous people's understandings to this relationship. Here in Aotearoa, New Zealand, tangata whenua provide an alternative and I believe truer way of understanding this relationship. whilst many other Indigenous peoples around the globe also have rich traditions which come from a deep understanding of Earth, cosmology, and where human beings fit into all of this. Australian Aboriginals and Native American Indians would be two such peoples. And of course, if we go back a long way in time, the ancestors of those of us who no longer remember or understand our Indigenous roots also understood relationship to land in this way. This understanding and relationship is one of respect, gratitude, and reciprocity. I think this understanding is fundamental to being able to make the transformational change that is needed at this critical time in the history of humanity and all other beings. So, this is my oral submission. Writing this submission has been very challenging for me as a layperson who is not versed in the ins and outs of a district plan. It has also been challenging because of the topic I am submitting on, and the fact that the district plan that will eventuate from this process will be the most consequential plan ever for the future of the people of Napier. Since 2021, when the process of preparing a district plan for the next 10 years began, the peer-reviewed scientific data provided by thousands of scientists around the world has concluded that the rate of change in global climate and the biosphere has increased rapidly, with the future looking extremely dire for our children and grandchildren, and already having serious impacts all around the world, including here in Napier and wider Hawke's Bay. In this context, although I support the overall thrust of this chapter, I have the following concerns. In the section entitled Issues, both natural hazards and the effects of climate change are identified as threats to our city, which need to be addressed when making decisions about development. And I go on to say, climate change is clearly not just a threat, rather it is becoming a global existential threat, which will be orders of magnitude greater than the threats posed by natural hazards such as earthquakes and volcanic eruptions. It is also not a natural hazard in respect of the speed and ferocity with which it is happening, and the now incontrovertible evidence that the use of fossil fuels by humans is the underlying cause. It is also increasing the frequency and ferocity of natural hazards and impacting every aspect of human life, two examples being food security and health. One of the strategic objects for this section of the district plan states, there is no significant increase in the risk from natural hazards, including the effects of climate change. And in my view, this once again conflates climate change with natural hazards. And the strategic objective that directly focuses on climate change is titled Climate Change Adaptation and states, land use, subdivision and development design supports climate change adaptation. No mention of the need to incorporate mitigation options as well. The only indirect reference to the need for mitigation of climate change is the following sentence in the introduction of this chapter on sustainability, resilience and climate change. And it reads, the protection and enhancement of Napier's biodiversity supports important ecosystems and habitats and provides opportunities for carbon storage that can reduce carbon emissions. However, it is clear to me that this plan must provide for both adaptation and mitigation in respect of a changing climate. These measures must also take into account both the reality of the situation we find ourselves in now and the increasingly dire situation we will face in the decade that this plan will be in place and in the decades beyond that. As I have said in a previous submission, or previous submissions to our council, adaptation without mitigation is a zero-sum game. As a footnote to this comment, I do note that in the council's document, Tirohanga Whanui, our vision, climate change mitigation is mentioned alongside adaptation and impact reduction. My point here is that mitigation needs to be given equal, if not more prominence, both in the operative district plan 2023 to 2033 document and in actuality. Moving on, Although the issue I'm going to raise next may be out of scope of this hearing, I feel that it needs to be considered. It is my understanding that the decisions and plans made during the district plan process are grounded in the current RMA, together with a number of other acts and a number of national policy statements. Further, I understand that all of these acts and national policy statements have already been removed or amended, or about to be, by the coalition government. I am therefore very concerned about the impact such changes will have on what can actually be delivered by Napier's operative plan during the next 10 years, when we need to be rapidly increasing our efforts to both adapt to the impacts of climate change and to mitigate any further escalation. As I outlined in my submission to the Council's current long-term plan, 2021 to 2031, we are currently facing a polycrisis with climate change at its centre. This polycrisis requires a joined-up approach which includes all the residents within each council area, the related city, district and regional councils, and the government of Aotearoa, New Zealand. Therefore, as part of this submission, I am asking that the Napier City Council raise my concerns, which I know are not mine alone, with other councils, Local Government New Zealand, and with the coalition government, to ensure that Napier's and all other operative district plans are fit for purpose over the next 10 years. I am also asking that Napier City Council engage more proactively with all Napier residents around understanding, making decisions and taking action in respect of the big environmental issues of climate change, environmental degradation and biodiversity loss. This will enable us all to understand the issues better and to contribute to more robust decision-making about land allocation and use, as well as all other aspects of our city. It will also build a stronger sense of community in Napier. This latter is another vital element to ensuring a sustainable and resilient future for our city. I believe that engaging more proactively with other governing bodies and with all of Napier's residents is pivotal to ensuring that Napier City Council can fulfil its duties of care for the people of Napier now and in the challenging years to come. And I guess I see what I've just read as a background to what the requests I'm making. And the first is that the importance of mitigation be given equal weighting with that of adaptation in the Operative District Plan 2023 to 2033. Secondly, that Napier City Council take all possible steps to ensure that the integrity of the Napier District Plan for the same period, as agreed to through this consultation process, is maintained. Thirdly, that Napier City Council engage ever more proactively with the residents of Napier regarding the implications of climate change to ensure that robust decisions can be made and realised for the well-being of the people who call Napier home. Note, it is vitally important that our young people are included in this engagement, as they are the ones who will be most affected by what we adults do or don't do now. And and I've provided some links to some information, of which there's a lot out there, which you will obviously all know.
Thank you. Questions for Ms. Moon? Can I just ask a question? So I was looking at the strategic objectives around this topic, broad that it is, and I can see your point here that the sixth objective talks about climate change adaptation. So are you at this level of the plan, the strategic level, looking for another objective around the mitigation of climate change, or
yes, I'm looking for. I guess I am. I hadn't thought of it in that way, so I haven't put one together.
No, that's right. That's right.
But yes, definitely, I think, but mitigation thus needs to be brought into the plan in a tangible and operational and, in a way, in a manner that it makes it clear that it's something that the plan is taking into account and coming up with measures to address, I guess, because I think, unfortunately, at the moment, where people are sitting is adaptation is what it's all about, and they're missing the point that we cannot out-adapt climate change. That's the reality. We'll very quickly get to the point where we can't on a number of different levels, including social, political, environmental, obviously. So that's my big concern as a mother and grandmother, looking towards the future of my children and grandchildren, etc. And I think with only focusing on adaptation, we're setting ourselves up to fail. And there's no question about that. That's a 100% how it will play out. And we're rapidly running out of time, so that's why I'm so keen that we think about that and include that in our plan now. I know it's been said for some time that this is the decade that we need to do what we need to do, and we're already nearly at the end of 2024. So we've got, and this is obviously, just talking in absolute terms, we've not got many years. So please, I'm asking this council, take that on board and find a way. I don't know, because I'm not a planner or but having said that, I've also pushed that we need to talk to the people of Napier. We need to, and I don't know, that possibly comes under the long-term plan. I have no idea where these things fit. But yeah, because it's becoming more and more obvious that we need all of us, from, the people right up through all the different levels of governance. And we definitely need young people in there. And there's, there are now lots of ideas on how that can be done, how we can work collaboratively in that way. One of them being, now I'm having a mind blank, citizens' assemblies is one idea. But, there's lots of ideas. And another kind of area I'm trying to work on outside of all this is to bring the arts into climate change, because basically we need to change the story. And it's counterproductive to just tell people all the negatives and all the terrible things that's happening. What we need to be doing is actually helping people to see that we can actually have a much better future if we make these changes involving both mitigation and adaptation. Here endeth the lesson, or whatever, the harangue, I should say.
Thank you. This may be an unfair question, but from the district plan perspective, which largely manages third-party activities in terms of their environmental effects and things, can you suggest one key policy platform that district plan could do to mitigate climate change or climate crisis?
You mean in terms of
managing land use activities?
Well, I guess it's looking land use. We're talking subdivision for housing, we're talking industry. I guess, not knowing how these things work, written into that could be a clear expectation that whatever is being proposed in terms of using land or industry or whatever, that mitigation has to be a primary factor. Does that work? Does that make sense?
So how would you see that playing out in, say, a development proposal? How would you see mitigation being a core part of that? What would that third party be doing?
Well, at minor levels, say it's a subdivision or whatever, it would be, obviously in the first case where the land is, or, where it's proposed. Then it's looking at housing. Again, this might be out of the scope of this, I don't know, but I think, we need to look at, we can't go on building huge houses. We need to look at houses that are fit for purpose, that which are insulated, which, talking about community electricity networks, but and also how they connect to the amenities that people need, so that's transport. It's also looking at making provision, like for stormwater retention, looking at how that happens and how you're going to work with stormwater. It also looks at providing for biodiversity, like plant, areas for trees, green areas. Recently, I live out in Jervistown, and I don't get around a lot, but I do travel within the Taradale area, and I've been quite concerned to see the amount of back infilling, I think it's called there, and just like houses and being literally jammed in acres of concrete, and so there's a stormwater concern, and there's also a concern from a human point of view with overheating. You know, we've got all these houses, all this concrete, no green space. It's got a, you know, and again, I don't know if the district plan takes into account mental health issues, but, you know, it's well known that people need and are, their health is supported by having green spaces. Are those things that can be? I have no idea. But certainly, yeah, I think, and the other thing would be, you know, in terms of agriculture, I mean, are we talking about how the whole plan is made? So what, you know, decisions about what land's going to be kept for food production, what land's going to be available for housing, for, is that what
Broadly, yeah.
Yeah, so again, looking at, you know, again, at the moment, housing all over Hawke's Bay is just spreading across the land, and we're losing food-producing land. And I'm talking here specifically in the context of climate change and the need for resilience. We need to be factoring in and allowing for land for local food production, because, you know, we saw during COVID what happened in terms of food supplies and other supplies, but we need to be, yeah, so as well as growing for export, we need to actually be making provision so that this area can be self-sufficient in food production, and also, I guess, electricity, looking at how we can make ourselves more self-sufficient there rather than relying on power being transmitted over, you know, long distances. So again, you're requiring, like, the idea of community sorry, getting old, brain not working so well. Yeah, just every aspect, really. I mean, if I'd been given more time to think about it, I might have come up with some
That's all
more.
right. That's okay.
But I'm sure you amazing people can.
You generated another question from Commissioner Brown.
Kia ora, Vanessa, and thank you for your very passionate and really holistic submission. I was wondering, with the objective around climate change adaptation, have you seen the staff's latest recommendations? Would you like me to read it out to you?
Your staff?
The staff's, yeah, in the
No, I
section
haven't
42.
seen them.
So possibly a procedural process. So it says, with your leave, climate change adaptation and mitigation is now the heading. So it was just climate change adaptation. And it talks about land use, subdivision and development design supports climate change adaptation and recognise and provides for those activities which assist in reducing greenhouse gas emissions.
Mm-hmm.
In your mind, do you think that goes far enough?
I'd have to think about that. As
Yeah.
I say, I'm a bear of very little brain these
Fair
days,
enough.
so I'd have to have time to think about it. I mean, it's definitely an improvement, but to me, I mean, obviously, mitigation nobody wants to know about because it means we have to make changes now. Adaptation, well, it's a bit of a bother, but, you know, generally speaking, it's not. So, yeah, and I guess, again, this is probably outside the scope of, well, obviously outside the scope of the district plan and more coming maybe into the long-term plan around, you know, yeah, because it has to be a joined-up thing around that. So, sorry.
That's right. No, it's good.
Would it be possible to invite Ms Moon to provide her comment like the other submitters?
You mean to
Yeah.
respond in writing
Yeah.
after the following this hearing? Yeah, I mean, I can't see why not. Have you seen the officer's report on this topic in any detail on this particular?
How recently? Do you mean that
A few weeks ago.
Probably procedurally hard if you're not a planner.
No, that's right.
I've just seen in the district plan information that came out, it's called streets.
Section 42A is what
Yeah.
you're looking for.
Oh, maybe
I know.
not. I'm not sure.
I know. I'm just thinking, in order to respond to that, you need to see the wording of it and how best to get her to see that wording exactly. So I think the main points of your submission are very clear. Thank you, and we'll take them on board when we deliberate. I have a feeling there's waving another question.
Can I call you Vanessa?
You can indeed.
Thank you. I'm really intrigued by your references to the issue of ownership. Right? And I'm just wondering whether you have any more specific ideas about how you incorporate new and old ways of looking at land ownership in this district plan. This part of me is saying, is there something in the existing plan, for example, that makes you say that? Or are there some things that you are seeing in a crystal ball for the planned district plan?
Well, my comments, I think that was that, I can't remember if that was in what I read out initially. I guess I was responding to the term land use and allocation. No, I can't recall. I mean, it was a few years ago that I wrote that particular thing, but yes, definitely, I think we do need to change how we think about land. I mean, that's beyond, obviously, the plan, but yeah, I think somehow, somewhere, there needs to be the notion that, hey, you know, I mean, this notion of ownership, like in our current paradigm, like I pay some dollars and I own this bit of land and I can do what I like. Obviously, there's district plans and things. But to me, because land is going to become more and more precious, and land is so important to people in terms of, you know, we're seeing homelessness at the moment, people disconnected from even being able to live somewhere, and the impact that has on mental health. So all of these things, I mean, I think I used the term polycrisis, and I know I've given the councillor document about that in the past. There's all these things coming together. So, I mean, yes, that would be a discussion to be had somehow.
Yeah.
How can we move? I mean, and I don't understand, obviously, tangata whenua's, you know, really how they see land, and that would be something to explore more, definitely, in connection with that land not being held, again, by an individual, but, you know, a larger group. And my understanding, which may be wrong, is that there's not that sense of buying and selling. So, I mean, it's kind of huge, but it would be fertile ground from my point of view. But how you fit that into your district plan, I have no idea.
You make a fundamental observation when you say the land owns us, and we don't own the land. I mean, people have argued about that for years. When it comes to actually defining that in terms of district plans, etc., it appears to be more challenging than just simply saying,
Oh,
yeah.
I realise that. I guess I just wanted to bring it into the discourse, as it were. And it's not, as you say, it's hugely complicated. It's an emotional decision for, you know, for people, and that's the story we live with at the moment, that you pay some money and you own this bit of land. And obviously there are impacts in terms of regulations and rules, but yeah. So, hey, guys, a discussion to have.
Yeah. But you make a good point, though.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks very much.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just a question, follow-up question.
So just for the officers, just in relation to the discussion that's been had with Ms Moon, I just had another look at SRC 06, which fellow Commissioner referred to, and the recommended change to the title, the adding the words "and mitigation," I'm not sure if that's actually captured in the wording of the objective itself. Like, mitigation is usually something that's done to address the adverse effects of an activity. The activity in this case is climate change. I don't think the objective actually addresses that. So, two questions for the staff. Is it appropriate to add the words "and mitigation" to the heading? And if you think it is, then how should the objective be amended to actually provide for mitigation? Because in my mind, it doesn't do that at the moment. I don't want you to respond now because you need to think about that, so you come back to us and reply.
That's exactly what I was going to ask, so thank you.
Yeah.
Could you explain that, please? I'm just wondering if you could explain that. I mean, mitigation in terms of climate change, I'm seeing as you're doing things to prevent, you know, climate change getting worse. Is that a different meaning, or?
Well, it could be, sorry, but it could be read two ways. Mitigation to mitigate the effects of climate change, or to mitigate the causes of climate change.
Well, I was using...
And I think there's a critical difference there.
Yes, thank you for pointing that out. I guess I was, without realising it and not making it clear, meaning mitigating the causes.
Causes, yes.
Because mitigating the effect is really, to me, adaptation, surely.
Yeah.
But anyway,
That's right.
I'll stop being a mad woman and
That's right, and hence my
Just
query to
more
the staff on whether or not the amendment to the heading is actually necessary. And if it
Thank
is,
you.
I think we need some extra wording in there.
And I'll take this stone, this rock, comes from up on the Coromandel and at a place called Tamawata, which is a wonderful retreat centre. So that's why I brought it today, to bring the spirit of that place here with me. So thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you for your
Yeah.
time. Now we have Mr. Bradshaw.
Tēnā koutou. Mine's pretty brief. So,
Okay, so I've got your submission in front of us and the sort of the addendum to it, which was that report or memo from Jason Tickner.
yeah, that was the original submission I think
Right.
came through, and then mine was just seeking a minor amendment to the wording there.
Right.
And to give some background, we've had a lot of big storm events in the last kind of 5 years here in Napier. 2018, Esk Valley flooded. 2020, Napier City City flooded. And then 2023 with Cyclone Gabriel. They've talked about 1 in 250-year events or bigger, but they all seem to happen pretty soon after one another. And so what I'm asking to do is add the wording that we avoid, where appropriate, development in areas that are prone or at risk of natural hazards. And in summary, I guess I'm just trying to avoid building or developing in dumb places.
Thank you. Questions, Mr. Bradshaw?
Good one. I'm not sure if this is procedurally allowed, so I'll ask it and you can tell me if I'm allowed to ask it, if that's okay. So you might have heard in the Regional Council's submission, they were talking about how the wording, I'm trying to find it, of risk is that we don't significantly increase risk from where it currently is, and wondering if you could provide comment around that wording. Is that appropriate?
If he feels confident.
Yeah, I think where it says there is no significant increase in the risk from natural hazards, I would revise that wording to say that where appropriate, we avoid any risk from natural hazards, including the effects of climate change, to people, property and infrastructure.
Questions? Mr. Bradshaw?
No, I don't.
No, but I'm just sure the officers are aware in their advice they'll come back to us and reply that a further submitter can only support or oppose an original submission. It's limited scope to alter the wording that's been sought by the original submitter, and in this case the submitter who was fire and emergency supported the wording as notified. So I'm not sure we've got much scope to actually address your...
Yeah, I was a little bit late in the process. I only moved to Napier recently. So
But anyway.
I can try my best.
Yeah, we've heard what you've suggested and can take that on board if the scope within that, but yes.
Good point.
Thank you. Okay, thank you.
Good. Thank you.
And Mr. Watts, online?
Good afternoon,
Yeah.
Mr. Chair and Commissioners.
Now, just on the point that, and I know you'll be very aware of this, but on the point that Commissioner Van Voorthausen just said, that Hawke's Bay Protein Limited is also a further submitter. So Your submission, your further submission was on primarily, wasn't it, Ravensdown submission? Is that correct?
Yes, that's right, in support of Ravensdown and some of Napier City Council's own submissions.
Right, okay. And within that sort of confined scope, we're open to hear your main points.
Yes, no, the scope's understood, thank you. So I'm appearing today for Hawke's Bay Protein Limited, which, as you noted, lodged a late further submission and is grateful to have been granted waiver to make that late submission. Hawke's Bay Protein Limited operates a large rendering plant in the Awatoto industrial area. And just to give you an idea of the scale of what it does, it processes 500 tons of animal waste, essentially, per day. So it's a significant, it's a big operation, and it essentially diverts all of that material having to be disposed of in other ways, such as by being buried or going to landfill. So it has a huge environmental benefit as well. Sometimes thought of as the oldest recycling business there is. So that's what Hawke's Bay Protein does. Under the operative district plan, the plant was located in the main industrial zone, and the operative district plan, you're probably familiar, there's some descriptions of the Awatoto area that kind of acknowledge the heavy industry that exists and operates there in that location. In the proposed plan, the plant would be, and that entire area would be in the general industrial zone. And I think it would be fair to say that Hawke's Bay Protein's main concern is to ensure that other large-scale and heavier industrial activities who are located in the Awatoto industrial area continue to be recognised and provided for by the plan. So I have provided some legal submissions in advance. Do you have a copy of those handy?
I do, got it in front of me right now. Yep.
Great. So for the purposes of today's hearing, my relevant submissions start at paragraph 12. They firstly deal with strategic direction in form of development issue 4. And Hawke's Bay Protein is supporting the submission of Ravensdown in that regard to provide appropriate scope, but really for the issue statement to acknowledge the opportunities for industrial activity to occur, potentially expand and grow as the businesses want to in order to be successful within Napier. The next objective that the company's made a submission on is objective 6. Again, we're supporting a submission by Ravensdown that objective 6 for urban form development be retained as notified. That's the policy that's the objective that industrial development contributes to economic well-being of the region while promoting the efficient use of infrastructure. That's and then the Section 42A officer has recommended retaining that provision as notified, and we're supportive of that. Then, in relation to policy 8 under urban form and development, the interesting issue under this policy, as it was notified, is that in paragraph C, it refers to ensuring that new heavy industry activities this is as notified, that generate air or trade waste discharge are located in a heavy industrial zone. However, the plan didn't go on to provide a heavy industry zone. There's only there's a general industrial zone, and that's what's been applied to any area that might be potentially classified as heavy industry. And so there's a disjunction there between the strategic direction and the zonings and objectives and policies that follow, and the company's supportive of Ravensdown's submission that policy be amended so that it directs heavy industry into the general industrial zone. And the company's submission is that's necessary in order to achieve the objectives of providing for industrial activity for the well-being of the district. So those submissions are fairly straightforward, but those are all of the company's submissions in relation to the strategic direction, and available to discuss any matters or any questions arising.
Okay, thank you. Any questions from the panel?
No, that's very clear.
Yeah, no, that was very succinct. So thank you very, very much for that, Mr. Watts. And we'll see you again on Wednesday, or some of us will.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Early morning tea.
Yeah, we'll take a break for afternoon tea, and can we restart at 3:30? Is that just a little bit earlier, or?
Yeah, we could probably be ready to go at 15:15.
Yeah.
Quarter past?
Would assist
Good.
the panel.
Yep, there's nods all around, so we'll take you on your word then. Thank you. So we'll resume the hearing at 3:15. Thank you very much.
Perfect.
the resumption of hearing stream 1, day 1. We have our last witness for the day, Mana Apureri Trust. Dan Hopkins, I'm guessing you're going to lead the charge.
Yes. Thank you, and I'm, I think, known to at least most of the panel. My name's James Gardner Hopkins. I'm here in the capacity as a project manager for the submitter, and I'm working on a variety of matters with them. I did file some representations. It's not my intention to take you through the detail, and in fact, with leave of the chair, I really just would want to make a few opening comments and then hand over to Mike, and I'll let each of the team introduce themselves as they speak. But he does have some time constraints. He needs, I think, to leave at 3:45.
Yeah.
So if that's an okay run sheet, and I'm happy to sort of be a bookend at the end as well, if there are some matters that I can assist the panel with.
Right, thank you.
Thank you. So look, essentially, and we understand the structured, if you like, nature of these proceedings, and that we're in this particular topic or hearing stream. And I suppose some of the specific amendments that Phil will talk to you about are within, clearly, that framework. Some of what the witnesses will be speaking to you about is a bit more scene setting. It's a bit more bigger picture, but we certainly say grounds and supports the particular relief being sought for this part of the process. So look, the intention is to help provide that setting and the importance sitting behind those particular amendments, and to do that at the outset and not necessarily repeat things as we go through the process. And that really is the key scene setting that I wanted to give this panel. The other component that maybe is helpful by way of introduction, and there was a brief discussion on it earlier, was about the FDS and certainly what we say, the relevance of the FDS and where it is currently at. And I think the panel heard there was a joint committee established by the three councils to work on, together with technical advisors, on the drafting of the FDS. What I don't necessarily know was touched on, at least from what I heard, was the fact that that joint committee also comprised representatives of the three post-settlement entities for the region. So it was very much a joint committee, councils and mana whenua, and they had equal representation on that committee. And there is a very strong emphasis in both the terms of reference and throughout the drafting of the FDS on the partnership between the councils and iwi. So that's an underlying theme in the FDS process, and we certainly say in the draft FDS. It's probably fair to say there were a few challenges along the way, but the latest version of the draft FDS that the Joint Committee adopted and has recommended back to each of the councils essentially has support from the submitter, and a key part of the process and a key issue was the inclusion of Ahuriri Station. And that is now agreed with the partner councils. And we say that's actually now something of a game changer and is a different factual scenario than when the PDP was first developed. And we've got some submissions later in different parts of the process around the zoning, and we'll need to give some thought to what it all means for that. But I just wanted to set that scene that some things have now moved on from the original position when the PDP was drafted. But look, I don't want to take too much time. I'll hand over to Mike to introduce himself and speak to what has been filed on his behalf.
O ngā mihi kia koutou katoa, ko Mike Pohio tōku ingoa. thank you for bringing this forward to allow me to catch a 4:20 flight. And apologies for just a little out of sequencing, because it would be more appropriate for James to open more fulsomely and then for Te Kaha to open on behalf of Mana Ahuriri. So the first thing I'd note is that just a correction to be made. I'm Mike Pohio and this is Te Kaha. So you'll see there are two submissions under Te Kaha's name, so if there's a correction can be made there. So I won't read this, but I'll just touch on the broad themes that sit within it. The first is unity. And as we make the submission for Ahuriri Station to be included in the proposed district plan and reinforce what has already been submitted, we just reinforce that we stand united amongst our hapu that make up Mana Ahuriri Trust. We stand united with our mana whenua partners, Maunga Hareru Tangatu and Tamatea Pōkai Whenua, and we stand united with our partner councils, and we also stand united across the whole of the community of the Hawke's Bay. So this submission is made very much with that in mind, that it is for all of us, and there are particular aspects that bind us together. Of course, in the case of Mana Ahuriri, the settlement just 3 short years ago, and that sits within Te Tiriti itself, but embedded in our drive for this to be included is the aspirations that we have and we're committed to and can't and won't let go of. Second point I make is the extent of work that we've done we feel is adequate to deal with where we're at in this planning cycle. It has been done at speed and with all of the necessary support from a technical point of view. We feel that that's been done, and I just wanted to acknowledge that. The third point I'll make is that this is unquestionably of regional and national significance. And somewhat coincidentally, I have been through this process of a project of national significance with a board of inquiry with Ruakura. And the added coincidence is that Phil Stickney here was was an early key planner in that process that carried some of the load. So I and members of our team are fully equipped and have the extensive knowledge of this scale and intensity of development. The next point I'll make is one of precedent, and specifically I refer to Ruakura in the context of that going through a board of inquiry, similarly of scale, 500 hectares of land, and it was presented on the basis of better enabling this country, Aotearoa New Zealand, to be able to have direct connect with our export markets. That in the 50 to 100 year time frame will continue to be somewhat at risk. We could become a satellite to Australia for direct connect from there to the rest of the world, but the likes of Ruakura and the development and connection that the likes of Napier Port have remain uppermost in our thinking about the significance of what Ahuriri Station can do to continue to support the Hawke's Bay and its direct connect to the rest of the world. And like I said, there's this precedent that some of us have been involved with that shows that with the inland port at Ruakura and the major industrial development. The relevance of this sits within the wider Hawke's Bay and relevant in that 100-year time frame. So we recognise that just the sheer scale of Ahuriri Station at over 1,200 hectares. 400 hectares or thereabouts is what we see as development. There'll be wider discussion on the whānau, which is absolutely fundamentally important to us. But in the planning and land matters, 400 hectares is large scale and potentially developable and to be developed over the course of the next 100 years. We're proposing this as being one of inclusiveness. We're presenting it not as an either or, that is, there are other developments not only already in play but proposed across the Hawke's Bay. We're presenting this to be in addition to and not as a consequence of any other development that is already known. So we're taking very much an and approach as opposed to it's not this versus another. We will draw on the unique aspects of that land and its setting, and we'll draw on the unique aspects of we as mana whenua, like I say, right at the start, in conjunction with those partners that we have. So I'm happy to take questions at this point. If not, happy to sit until...
Yeah, thank you for
I
that.
need to
Just
go.
so we're all on the same page, where is and what is Ahuriri Station?
The airport, you'll know about. It's
Yeah.
the 1,200 hectares that surrounds the airport.
Yep.
Largely the flat plain.
Yeah.
It was uplifted from the, to a large extent, uplifted from the earthquake. So what you see used to be lagoon, and therefore what we will refer to as the life source for mana Ahuriri.
Right, so if I'm looking at Mr. Garden Hopkins' representations, is that the first map on the top of page 3? Is that Ahuriri Station?
Yes.
Okay, that's great. And it's very interested in your evidence, your para 32, that you talked about. You've been listed as a Schedule 2B project on the new fast track legislation. Obviously, we could look at that online, I think we could, but what does that actually involve? What are you seeking through the fast track process? What outcome are you hoping for there?
Do you want to answer that particularly?
I'm happy to take that. So that's another project I've been involved with.
Good.
And essentially the same master plan that has been put forward for the FDS was put forward for listing in the fast track process. You may be aware that originally there was this distinction between Schedule 2A and Schedule 2B, which, as I understood it, Schedule 2A were projects that were more advanced and were sort of on the cusp of either having consents lodged already or perhaps had already had consents lodged. And Schedule 2B was perhaps a slower burn, shall we say. And Mike did say we've done an awful lot of work. We've done a lot of ground truthing. We've done a lot of risk mitigation testing. But in terms of a fully formed consent proposal, we don't have that.
Right.
But we now, assuming the legislation is passed, will have the ability to go to a panel and to seek resource consent for the project as a whole. The whole land holding is to be included in the schedule, together with the mix of activities that are described in summary form as including the commercial, mixed use and residential.
So be a master planning process facilitated by the fast track.
Correct, and at this stage we're not sure if it might be a master plan that is consented in concept, or whether there might be a particular first stage or first 2 or 3 stages that may go through the fast track process.
And if that is granted, what impact would that have on the changes being sought to the district plan?
Yes, so we would still be seeking many, if not most, of the same changes. The fast track is an opportunity. We don't know how long that opportunity will sit there in terms of if the government changes, it may disappear very quickly. But it is something that serious thought is being given to get as much out of it as quickly as possible. But we do see that the district plan takes a longer term view and provides an important opportunity and an important backdrop that any consent application, even on a fast track, would be considered against.
Thank you.
Can I just follow up? And the other development sites shown in your representations, how do they fit in with the Ahuriri station?
So there are different locations, and I might actually pass the detail of the response to Phil. I think he was more involved than I was when those original schedules were put together.
Afternoon, Mr. Chair and others. Yeah, in terms of those sites, they're all currently within the urban area of the district plan. Ahuriri Station is, I think, the key site that's outside the existing urban area. Some of those sites, Whararangi Road, 42 Whararangi Road, is acknowledged by council as being a strategic site to help with their housing supply contributions. That obtained a resource consent for medium density and general residential earlier this year. That's actually proposed to be upzoned all to medium density and local commercial as part of the proposed district plan. Munro Street as well, on the fringe of the CBD, we're seeking some changes. There's currently a land use consent in for a mixed use or housing medium density development and train with Napier City. And Hospital Hill, we've also lodged existing use rights certificates for some of those former structures, the nurses' hostel and the maternity home, which are large sites that have potential to be redeveloped. So there's a significant amount of work underway, and some of that was prepared prior to the proposed plan being notified. So we're seeking some alignment between the projects and what the plan provisions is notified direct us to do.
No.
Thank you.
Kia ora. Paris Greening, General Manager of Mana Ahuriri. Just wanted to add to the land take parcels that are being presented in the PDP. They're all known as either deferred settlement properties or right of first refusals. So they have a direct relation to our Te Tiriti settlement package. We have a finite time or finite window to purchase those blocks of land as part of our settlement and to develop them. So I just wanted to give you some insight into those parcels.
Thank you. Right. Do we have any more questions?
That was good.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mike, for that. I want to touch on this issue you raised about unity, right? Being all-inclusive. Now, you missed the earlier part of today's hearing where I raised that very question with staff here about why there were so few Māori submissions, only 5. I said, well, why only 5? And I got the impression that they'd done such a good job that only 5 bothered, there was only space for 5 submissions. But in it, though, lies a wider message, which you've touched on today. Question 1 is the unity of inclusiveness of all the iwi and all the other hapu around the whole Heretaunga Ahuriri rohe. I know there are lots. Now, if I look at my own rohe, the next door lot will always want more than you got, and vice versa. I mean, there's always that tension, that between hapu and between iwi. I'm getting the impression from what's been said all through today that the unity issue is I shouldn't say solved or sweet, or maybe it's almost sweet. I'm not quite sure what the right phrase here, but can you, or any of you, just talk to that? I mean, how has it been going with other iwi, the council partnerships, for example, the whole broad brush? Very good question.
o kātira kei te tūwhakaiti au ki te tukumihi kia koutou e ngā kaihautu i ārahi tēnei kaupapa whakahirihira, ko tō mātou rōpū tēnei o mana ahuriri ngā hapu e whetua ahuriri e mihi ana kia koutou nō reira tēnā koutou katoa. O tēnei te tukumihi kia koe a raurua te wākāri e kitia, engari kei te hare ko au ki te kitia kia koe anō, koutou hoki tēnā koutou katoa. Ko te rua te paia ko te whānga, he kāinga tō te atai, he kāinga ka awatea, he kāinga ka ahi e tama e. So the storage house that never closes, that provides food in the morning, food at lunchtime, food in the evening. That's our pack and save. And that's in relation to Te Whanganui a Orotu, or the Ahuriri station that's referenced in here. And what's important about Te Whanganui a Orotu, or the Ahuriri station, is the connection that holds for our 7 hapu. And through our settlement, coming together with our 7 hapu, we've put these proposals together. So I guess on behalf of our 7 hapu associated with Ahuriri, we're in a consensus around the approach that we take to developing these sites and the opportunities that we have in our settlement. Maungaharuru Tangitu, who are our neighbours that we share 2 hapu with, that are associated with the 7. We've been engaging with them in this project throughout, especially the Ahuriri station. They were sitting on the committee, the FDS committee, which helped support and pass the motion for the inclusion of the Ahuriri station. So in regards to neighbours, they're our closest, and we have a strong relationship with them and continue to get their support. In regards to Ngāti Kahungunu Iwi, we hold strong relationships with them. They acknowledge that we're mana whenua in this area, so we don't see any issues on that front. And of course our Tai Whenua, who are a branch under the iwi, we work in close connection with them as well. So probably our biggest thing would be making sure that we continue our wānanga with our hapu to make sure that we develop these sites based on their aspirations. So I think with our relationships with our neighbouring whānau, it's in a strong position. And of course, Maungaharuru Tangitu supported this FDS application. Hopefully that's answered that, spoken to the
Perhaps I'll also just add that it's very much an approach that we have taken, and just last week we celebrated the signing of a joint venture to build 400 homes. Whararangi is one of those locations. There are actually 5 in the Napier City that we have joint ventured with a partner, and we've made that the development of those available for a mix of our whānau and an open market. We've made it available for other iwi to invest, our neighbours, as well as others across the Motu. So consider it that there are specific relationships that reinforce that localised one of unity, but also the Hapai joint venture, like I say, that was signed last week, is another, I guess, commercial enterprise that binds us in a, hey, we're here as a collective with other iwi investors, with the intention of developing and providing much needed housing in this area.
Yeah. I must say, Mike, when I read your evidence, I wasn't surprised to see Ruakura come up in it. But as a template, I suppose, or as an example of what can be achieved and what, you know, an iwi might aspire to, it just seemed to me it was either really, I mean, it was coincidental, or it was, you know, it just seemed to be the right template to work with. Now, how do you see the Ahuriri station development go? I mean, is it along the same lines as Ruakura did, or pretty much?
Broad terms, Ruakura is dedicated to facilitating the import and export and having a super efficient and low-cost supply chain. So equidistant between Tauranga and Auckland and, like I say, dedicated more to that logistics sector. Ahuriri Station doesn't have the benefit of proximity to Auckland. It does, of course, have proximity to the port, but it doesn't have the same intense nature of logistics that will be attached to it. There will be scale that of course, the Hawke's Bay needs as New Zealand's premier exporter of horticultural products, but it won't be as specific as Ruakura is. It will definitely draw on the nature of what is produced here and what is required to be manufactured here, what is required to be imported here. There will be a mix to recognise the special features of this region.
And also there's a particular nature of the environment here. I mean, the commercial environment is a little, will be different.
It's just the outright scale. So with 400 hectares, for example, the Target store in Hamilton is 40,000 square metres. You can only do that with a large-scale industrial development that allows, those really big boxes that would otherwise struggle to be able to be built in any of the other locations in the Hawke's Bay area.
Just to support Mike's kōrero with Te Whanga's importance with specific wāhi tapu sites and it being the old estuary, key focus of the project's not only to make sure we have a strong whairawa base for our hapu into the future, but it's also for the restoration of a large part of the estuary as well, which is going to be included in the project. And of course, the protection of our wāhi tapu sites. So it's a holistic way for us to meet the aspirations and the goals that we've outlined in our strategic plan in the paper, to have a strong, sustainable economic base, but fulfilling our role as kaitiaki and restoring key parts of that area, our connection to those wāhi tapu sites, and fulfilling our aspirations.
All right. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So
That's right.
we've had a little bit of a free-flowing discussion.
That's right.
I'm not quite sure if anyone else wanted to sort of add. Otherwise, we could just hand over to Phil to get into some of the technical nitty-gritty. Did you want to say anything?
Yeah, so you talked about Unity 8. Here in Kahungunu, we're priding ourselves on the kotahitanga kaupapa that's going out. Last week, Te Kaha and I attended the Iwi Cheers Forum, where kotahitanga again was raised. Te Kaha took our kaumātua and a couple of our cheers down to Ōtautahi to celebrate down there, and kotahitanga was spoken about again. Omahu Marais hosted it, Ratana Pās hosted it, Tūranga Waiwais hosted it. So kotahitanga is at the forefront of Māoridom. Kotahitanga is one of the values of Mana Ahuriri, and we want to be in a position to enable and enact that value alongside the other values of tika and pono and manaakitanga. When we put our proposals together, we are making mokopuna decisions and mokopuna changes. However, we know what's good for Māori is good for everyone. We can't do it alone. It's important we have enduring relationships with our council, our Te Tiriti partners, right from governance, right through operations. Mana Ahuriri is trying to have those enduring relationships. We may not get it right all the time, but we have the intent to have that done. And saying that too, also, our dynamics in our Te Ao Māori world, they're there. We're trying. We've got the right leadership here with this man to take us forward together with our other PSG to bring our whānau into the journey. The ngāwari that this board has towards our people is at the forefront. Everything we do as our mokopuna, everything we want to be and aspire to be is not only for Māori, but for everyone here in Ahuriri. We've watched, we've learned, we've seen. We're the newest PSG here. We have some who are 15 years old, we're 2.5 years old. We've talked to them. We think that we have the right mix to have an enduring relationship with our treaty partners, to bring our whānau into the journey, to have those strong relationships with our other Māori entities, our marae, our hapu, our PSG, our iwi, and right across the motu, to be able to enact some of the aspirational things. I just wanted to address that. I hope that you hear us.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mr. Sickney.
Thank you. Is this swivel? I'll move it around. Thank you very much. Kia ora, everybody. Good afternoon. My name's, for those of you who don't know me, my name's Phil Stickney. I'm a Technical Director of Planning at Development Nous, based in Hastings. I've been in the planning sector now for about 30 years, primarily in private practice. Look, I'll take my qualifications, etc., as read. But I've been heavily involved with Mana Ahuriri on a number of the projects that you've heard about and are which are now advancing at pace. And those projects will make a meaningful contribution to housing supply and economic development in Napier. So although it's been a long time coming, certainly in the last 18 months, there's been a significant amount of effort to get some of those key consents bedded in and some momentum. So the district plan is of prime importance. It feels a bit like we're diving into the weeds after hearing from the team, but I hope you will appreciate that that is relevant in the context of some of the submission points we made in terms of Papakāinga and Māori aspirations for urban land development, etc., which I'm going to just run through. The other complicating factor, and I know Fleur and the team are aware of it, is the FDS proceeding in relation to the proposed district plan and where that will land. But I think in terms of today's chapter and Papakāinga specifically, that's something we can probably put to one side, with the exception of, in the context of the relief that we sought at the time the submission was lodged, and as James has pointed out, Ahuriri Station coming on board and other projects now being landed, but particularly Ahuriri. The submission, and James can speak to this if needed, the submission did seek wide-ranging relief in terms of consequential subsequent amendments that may be required to better give effect to the nature of the submissions. So in my statement today, I have on page 8, in the context of this, suggested some changes to the strategic directions chapter and a couple of objectives there, one of which relates to the treaty settlement process and a matter which is directly relevant to Papakāinga, but also some more overt objectives which relate to the urban or the aspirations of Māori in terms of land development. Now, those may be matters that you may want to consider at subsequent hearings as we go down the track in relation to other topics, but I think within scope to put those in now for your consideration and see, let you consider how you may want to deal with those. But effectively what they are doing is taking a wider view of Māori development and Māori aspirations for Napier, which is clear from what you've heard today. On that note, in terms of Papakāinga itself, and this is one that I grappled with when looking at what had been notified and went through the Section 32 report very carefully and the Section 42A report. I think just as in the case of all the changes that are bedded in terms of the settlement process, redress, acquisitions, consents being obtained, the Papakāinga chapter is relatively narrowly focused as it's currently drafted in terms of the provisions that it applies. And look, it's telling, I think, that the legislation that the chapter refers to, the legislation dates from 1966 and 1997, which tends to perhaps suggest something about the process that Papakāinga has traditionally followed. And I think it is really about traditionally being on ancestral land in a rural or more remote location, the ability for iwi to reside back on that land and grow their community in those locations. I think now with the treaty settlement and redress process and strategic acquisitions, we have a challenging situation for Napier, unlike Central Hawke's Bay and Hastings, where we're primarily an urban area. There's very little rural land. What there is of that land is quite marginal. So we're effectively within an urban municipality settlement. And so that's when the Papakāinga rules and applying those to development opportunities on some of the strategic sites that Mana Ahuriri may acquire or have a right to purchase or may acquire subsequently in the future. That's when the provisions become somewhat challenging, and I would suggest out of kilter with the same provisions that would apply if you were a residential property developer who wanted to provide a certain form of housing. And I think that is really clearly something that, in terms of the NPSUD, is something that for Napier we possibly, I think Council needs to take a closer look at and consider, and particularly Objective 4 of the NPSUD, and that recognises amenity values changing over time, and that's in response to diverse and changing needs of people, community and future generations. So Papakāinga, as you'll see in my evidence, we noted that Ngāti Whātua are looking at the multi-level Papakāinga concept in close proximity to the marae. It's a very urban response to housing provision, but that's in response to the changing needs of iwi and housing need, but also just to the changing concept of what a Papakāinga is, and it's evolving over time, as everything does. There's a responsibility under Policy 9 of the NPSUD for local authorities to take into account the values and aspirations of hapu and iwi for urban development and provide opportunities for Māori involvement in decision-making on planning processes. And that's operating in a way that's consistent with iwi participation legislation. So we're now at the point through the settlement process and the setting up of commercial entities for Mana Ahuriri Trust in forms of limited partnership, etc., with Mike and the team's involvement, that there is now a business model there to grow and to provide not only economic benefit but social benefit for iwi, but also the wider community. And some of that will need to be done on urban land, which is where the changes we're seeking come in. I understand the reasons for the reporting planning officer having some concerns about removing the land tenure distinction for Papakāinga, and the concern is that that could compromise the intent of the chapter and allowing developments that don't achieve the objectives of retaining Māori ownership or connection. Now, a traditional developer is not going to utilise the Papakāinga provisions within the zone if they can avoid that, and certainly in the way they're structured. What the thrust of the evidence is to broaden the opportunities for development of Papakāinga as a uniquely Māori form of development, but not necessarily tied to a rigid framework of land ownership and tenure, or perhaps in adopting a wider understanding of what a Papakāinga can be, and where it may move to in 10 years' time or over the life of the district plan as well. So on that note, we sought some changes to the objectives and policies in the plan, and we outlined those in our submissions. Now, it's interesting, by removing that tenure approach, and the planning officer acknowledges in the Section 32 that adopting a broader approach could actually streamline the process. But then there appears to be a counter argument that to do that would perhaps enable developments that don't align with the intent of the chapter, and that is very much communal housing on Māori land and ensuring long-term Māori ownership. So on that basis, we've been looking through, we're really about creating a level playing field for Papakainga in terms of an urban setting and providing housing opportunities and other opportunities that are complementary to that. And this is in the fact that the circumstances are unique to Napier City, but also the history of land alienation in this area. I don't believe that those have really been considered in the context of the rules that are proposed and the redress process and the settlement and acquisitions process that's now underway. So in terms of trying to achieve that balance, and without wanting to, and being cognizant of the undermining of the Papakainga chapter as it's currently drafted, because there is still going to be, in the future, there will be Papakainga that are still on ancestral land, rural, albeit not much of it in Napier. So how do we deal with the urban side of it and the land tenure issue? So at the moment in the standards, we've got a number of thresholds. You're either controlled or discretionary, and those thresholds relate to the classification of the land and connection to the land. And look, I have not drafted this in detail, but I'm happy to confer with council officers as well, is rather than actually undermine that completely and take that away, why don't you add the two more pathways to that? So iwi have a choice as to how they may wish to proceed, and I'll come back to the reason why for that. So one of those, which we wanted to get changed in the objectives and policies section, was to specifically reference land returned or acquired under a treaty process. And the other one was land acquired by an iwi authority or land managed by an iwi authority for the benefit of their members. Now, I don't see any reason why those couldn't be added as options to pursue for Papakainga and the adoption of that path, meaning that if you do want to head down the path of on ancestral land or land that is Māori land, you can do that. But if you've recently bought a piece of general freehold title and the aspiration is to develop a Papakainga on that site, those last two criteria or thresholds that we're suggesting could be appropriate would keep it within the confines of a Papakainga and tied back to iwi, but albeit in a different way, as Mike talked about today, joint venture partnerships, other organisations that then have the opportunity to come on board. That also, I would hope, goes some way to dealing with the problems of finance, which can be challenging on Māori land for developing Papakainga, and provides the opportunity then to open up additional avenues of funding as we go. In my experience, and look, I've dealt with, as Mike said, Ruakura and the settlement process associated with that and other developments in Northland over the years. And a lot of the time with the treaty settlement is you end up in a situation where you're land rich, but you're cash poor. And so you need to attract investment, but you need certainty of ownership and you need a structure that the current financial arrangements work for to give you the capital to start to grow and get some momentum as you move forward. So, look, I think adding those two and considering adding those other options to pursue for urban sites would actually be an appropriate measure that I hope would not then undermine the more, dare I say, traditional view of Papakainga as well, and the pathway you may want to go down. On that note, that comes back then, leads on to the really down in the weeds with the standards. And look, I'm heartened, the planning officer has recommended some changes to align the standards for Papakainga with the underlying zone, and particularly in terms of coverage, etc., which for smaller urban sites is an efficient use of land and absolutely makes sense, and the same with height. I would suggest that those standards still are disjointed, and there are standards still in there in respect of open space areas, for example, where it's 400 square metres of shared open space. You can reduce that down. There's still some standards in there that even though you've upped the coverage, those other prevailing standards actually possibly still create constraints. And when I'm saying this, I'm thinking of more inner city, fringe urban developments that may be more than 1 story high. And that's something, there's nothing on the cards yet, but that is something that we need to be starting to think about and testing more in terms of the effects that will generate, but also the benefits that it may, that it may bring. I'm not able to find any in-depth analysis of the testing of the recommended rules to date, notwithstanding there have been some changes, and I may not have stumbled across in the Section 32 or any of the background documentation those standards. It looks to me as if they are reasonably consistent with some of the other standards from Central Hawke's Bay and from Hastings. And I absolutely understand perhaps wanting to get some regional consistency with those standards, but also, as I said, we're dealing with an urban setting primarily, and one which is relatively constrained in terms of its ability to grow. And so in the same way we look at housing efficiency in a general manner, we should be looking at using land for Papakāinga in the most efficient way possible as well, but still achieving the outcomes that are wanted. Look, that's, without going into the sort of track change line by line, that's the general thrust of the planning evidence today. And just really trying to broaden Papakāinga in the chapter, not just relying on ancestral or Maori title. I think that is a relatively narrow view. But conversely, if we don't want to take that away as an option, but let's look at adding that urban structure for urban Papakāinga and more intensive and alternate forms of Papakāinga into the mix, which won't necessarily benefit from being tied to the traditional landholding structures that Papakāinga are associated with. I'm more than happy to confer with any of the officers or respond to any questions you may have now, or conversely, if there's questions that come up later, we're more than happy to respond in writing back to the panel. Thank you very much for your time.
Cool. Mr. Stickney, questions?
Yep.
Yes?
Mr. Stickney, I just got half a dozen things I'd like to ask you about. There was a very fulsome verbal presentation of your written evidence.
Thank you.
The first question I have is at your paragraph 5.2, and I just want to confirm the evidence I've got in front of me is dated 17 October. That's the latest version? There's not something I'm missing?
That's correct.
Okay, great.
Yep.
In terms of the amendment you're seeking to SD TWO4, I was just wondering, in terms of the underlined words at the end, would it be helpful if that was to say, for example, and land otherwise owned or managed, just to broaden it out?
Yes, that would be fine. Absolutely.
Now, I don't have any questions relating to your requested new SD TWO5. I understand the rationale for that, so no questions there.
Thank you.
In terms of your new objective SD UFD 11,
yes,
and to give effect to Policy 9B of the MPSUD, Policy 9B of the MPSUD is to take into account the values and aspirations of Hapuaniwi for urban development.
Yes.
Now, it appears to me that if we as a panel were to agree with the amendment you've sought to Objective 04, and if we were as a panel were to be persuaded that your new Objective 05 should go into the plan, doesn't that give effect to the MPS Policy 9B already without the need for a further objective?
It would, I think once again, Policy 9B is very much an urban-driven response.
Yep.
And policy direction. So absolutely, it says it has similarities to the messaging and the other objectives, but I think it is very much focused on urban development. So I think that's probably in this context something that I would recommend be retained, maybe subject to some amendments, but I think that urban development aspect is very, very important in this case.
All right, so in light of that answer, and that's helpful, could you maybe give some thought to how either a further amendment to 04 or 05, just to reflect that urban development? I'm always keen to minimise the amount of objectives and policies in the document, and it's easy to tweak ones and add whole new ones. That could be appreciated. Now, just in terms of the Papakāinga provisions, you've, in sort of narrative terms, thought a whole lot of amendments to provisions that I've noted down, your introduction, policy 1, 2 and 5,
Yep.
rules 2 and 3, standards 5, 6 and 7, and you said you haven't provided track changes for us, but you really need to do that.
Yep.
And so what I'd invite you to do is to come back to us, and not too distant a time, probably within the next week or two, with the actual precise wording that you're seeking to those provisions. And you've emphasised the context of this summit as issues in terms of the urban environment, which I think we understand. Look, and when you're looking to develop those track changes for our benefit, I'd recommend you look at the decision of the hearing panel on the Rotorua District Council's intensification planning instrument, of which I was a panel member. We considered a lot of these very similar issues in an urban environment context and developed a number of amendments to the provisions of the Rotorua District Plan to provide for a lot of the things that you're asking for. So that may save you reinventing the wheel. Have a look at that decision, which is available on the Rotorua Lakes District Council webpage, and the amended Papakāinga provisions in their district plan. Just to give you something.
No, thank you. I'm always keen to avoid reinventing the wheel.
Yeah.
Okay.
And just one final question. In terms of the issue of the Ahuriri station, I'm just looking at the actual submission of Matt Mana Ahuriri Trust, which is 104 pages long, but on page 73 of that, it talks about an Ahuriri special purpose zone with a framework of objectives and policies, issues, standards and rules, and it talks about the structure planning processes, etc. So I guess for you, Mr. Gardner-Hopkins, and I simply don't know the answer to this, are we later on in this process going to see this submitter coming back with the nuts and bolts of what's been asked for the Ahuriri station?
Yes.
Yeah.
That's the intention.
Yes.
And look, as part of my bookend, I was going to raise that and perhaps seek some direction from the panel. I'm not quite sure which panel will be dealing with the zoning provisions. But as I understand it, the specific issue of how Ahuriri Station is to be included, if it is, that question, if and how, would be part of the zoning topics, which I think is due in July. But of course, from this side of the table, our team will need to be organising itself earlier in the new year because I anticipate it will need quite a comprehensive package. It may well require, quite a bit of technical evidence, landscape, ecology, just the whole thing. If it is going to, I guess, get a fair crack at the whip, or to give the panel hearing it enough information to get over an evidential threshold and understand what's the evidence in support, what are the specific provisions that are being sought. So, yes, that was something on my mind to try and flag, because I have had a case where a submitter has turned up with the full package at some surprise to the council and its team, and they've gone, we don't have time to review all of this, and so it hasn't actually assisted the panel to the extent that it could otherwise have.
Yeah, and I imagine that would be accompanied, as usually the case, with a Section 32 analysis.
Yes.
And I'm heartened by your answer to that. And if there's an issue of scope, I'm not sure if there is an issue of scope or not, but I think your submission, as I've just referred to, that page 73 of 104, certainly asks for what you've outlined in general terms. So without discussing it as a panel, I wouldn't have too many concerns with scope. But if there are concerns with scope, I'm sure you could address that in a memorandum to us and seek some guidance or directions from the chair on that.
Yes.
Okay, great. And I'd certainly encourage you, in terms of developing those detailed provisions, to liaise with the council staff. And it's always helpful to a panel if when you come forward, you can say, look, these provisions have been agreed, these ones there's some disagreement on, and here's the various views. And just so we have that full picture in front of us, that would be really helpful if you could take that kind of approach.
Yes, understood.
Thank you. But other than that, no further questions, and thanks for the comprehensive package of submissions and evidence that you've presented to us today.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your wonderful and full submission. I've got a question, and I hope you'll forgive me. This might be a Pākehā bumping into the furniture a little bit. So you mentioned, firstly, I can understand why you'd like to broaden the scope of the definition of land ownership when heading into Papakāinga. And you mentioned about the traditional view of Papakāinga, but then also the future of what potentially modern Papakāinga could look like, and sort of some creativity in that space. Is there a desire to try and retain the Papakainga style development specifically for Māori? Do you say at the exclusion of others, I suppose, is the question?
So the focus is on whānau and hapu, and because we know that's where a lot of the challenges are with whānau and the amount of land available for whānau. I think what you might see is in some of our developments is they're not just specific for whānau, they're specific for the wider community, and I guess the value that has as a Papakainga setting is a more holistic approach. So yes, I guess is the answer to your pātai. There is a focus on whānau, that's where the need is, but we also know that sharing the concept of Papakainga will have wider value for our wider community.
I suppose further to that, would there be an objection to opening, getting rid of the provision in its entirety, or would you like it to be retained to Māori ownership of land?
I think there's opportunities still, and it's loudspeaker Paris, and I think there's still opportunities that more traditional Papakainga provisions that works, and it's been proven to work. It's somewhat challenging in terms of the paper trail and the funding, etc. But I think rather than throw that completely out, I think it's valid from a planning perspective and a wider perspective to keep it, but it's to broaden the scope of it so that you've got different avenues you can choose, iwi can choose to go down, depending on the circumstances of each case. Does that help?
I suppose I was thinking more and it might be outside of the scope of the submitters, but non-Māori based eco-villages or something, whether they could use this provision in order to go through. So, and whether there was a cultural hesitation to open up the concept to non-Māori, I suppose, is the question.
Kia ora, Hayley. I think the key concept around a Papakainga, it's whakapapa based, and whakapapa based to whenua, that was traditional whenua. So some of the concepts could be used, but in terms of the principles behind it of whakapapa and whenua, there'd be another pathway that they'll need to look at.
Thank you.
You could marry in.
You're already married.
Your husband might have a problem. Thank you for that. Just going back to those broad strategic level objectives, I was just trying to look, and it's late in the day, so probably me being blind, but did the original submission seek, or submissions, because there were two, sort of jointly, to make changes to the strategic level thing?
Not overtly. The relief that was sought was to capture any subsequent consequential amendments that may be required to give effect to the submission. I think that was prepared obviously prior, and James, you might want to chip in with the prior to the FDS, but also prior to Ahuriri Station and being listed as a project in the fast track bill as well. So things have moved on since. But James, I don't know whether you've got any views on the
So look, I did
timing
address
of the changes.
this issue in my representations, and I think, just in a nutshell, there was some general relief sought relating to MAT's aspirations,
Correct.
cultural values, and the like, and so it's not just the consequential any other relief that we're relying on. We're relying on a broad submission as originally filed to ground the jurisdiction for what we are now bringing to the table. And to some extent that's similar to some sort of a structure plan for Ahuriri Station with some objectives and policies and rules that were identified in general terms in the original submission, and the evidence and the case to be made at the relevant part of the hearing will then flesh that out. So we're certainly pretty confident there's no jurisdictional bar to either the new objectives or amendments to the objectives and policies for this part of the hearing. And we're also confident that when we do bring the package for Ahuriri Station, there's no jurisdictional impediment there. But if the panel did have some discomfort, we can address that further.
Okay. Well, I can be open and say I do have a level of disquiet about this because it hasn't been assessed by the Section 42A reporting officers. They haven't had a chance to consider all this, quite aside from the issue of scope. So I think I would appreciate, the panel would appreciate some sort of response to the question around it, because consequential kind of indicates not minor as such, but sort of things you have to do because you've done that. This is the other way around. It's kind of, because we want to do this, you're going to have to change that kind of thing.
Correct. And look, that's why I wanted to make the distinction that we think there's a broad general submission as well as a bit of the catch-all in terms of consequential or other relief. So look, very happy to have that addressed further.
Cool.
Okay. So in terms of Mr. Stickney is going to go away and look at Rotorua and other provisions, could I ask for the same to be done around that point?
Yes.
And come back to us at the same time, just to make sure the process is being...
Correct. And did I hear 2 weeks might have been suggested?
The reporting officers are working to a time frame of their end of hearing reply report to us of around about 2 or 3 weeks. So you're to be helpful, and there's no huge rush on this, but we just want to address these issues while they're fresh in everyone's mind. But to be helpful to our process, I think if you can work to a 2-week time frame, if that's achievable.
End of next week, 15th?
Yeah, a couple of weeks.
Yep, that's fine.
Yeah, we are at the advantage of being at the start of the process,
Yeah.
so that gives it a little bit more leniency in terms of timeframes.
Okay, no, that's fine, that's doable. And look, if we can, Fleur and the team, if we can feel comfortable that we can liaise with the council officers as we go through on that. I don't think the changes to the Papakāinga chapter are necessarily substantive in themselves, but I think, we'd be more than happy to provide them.
Yeah.
Okay, and the other issue, and it's arisen in another jurisdiction I was working on in terms of this issue, is around the long-term tenure of Papakāinga, in terms of if general title land is used. And it kind of relates to Commissioner Brown's question, are the provisions there that addresses that long-term tenure issue in terms of the surety of it being held in trust for that purpose?
There's a number of legal avenues that obviously a party can go down to secure ownership and management as we go. So that's certainly something that we can look at with the track changes as well without making it too complicated.
Okay, thank you. Any further questions?
Yeah, I want to pick up from where Mike ended, right? And in a sense that the plan he has in mind is a fairly ambitious one, right? Very ambitious one. But I think a product of the whole wider treaty settlement process breeds that has helped breed that line of thinking right across the motu. Every iwi is thinking about, okay, how do we capitalize on the settlement process and all the things that go with it? How do we make the most out of that? And in saying that, we've had to actually devise some new thinking and new ways of doing things. You know, it's obvious everywhere. When I think of the Papakāinga issue before us, and you touched on it when you referred to what you perceived as being a kind of narrow approach to defining Papakāinga in what we're dealing with today, which to a certain extent I agree with you. It is quite narrow. because it doesn't allow for the development, you know, the ambition sort of stuff that I'm referring to here. And in a lot of the broader Māori discussions I've been having around Papakainga, the question of things like, why can't Papakainga be used for commercial purposes? Those sorts of things. We use it for housing, we use it for cultural development, all that sort of stuff, but we kind of fall short, you know, of just taking an extra step. And I rather suspect that Ngāti Whātua is thinking along those lines as well. You know, how can we take that and yet still retain the whakapapa thing you're talking about? The base, you know, the thing that sort of underpins the whole Papakainga thing, because I think we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that the word Papakainga itself has a quite clear meaning for Māori. It is, you know. And the arguments I hear, and this is intra-Māori ones, around using the Papakainga thing for other, you know, broader purposes. And I say this because to think like that, it shouldn't be surprising, because we're all thinking along those lines on a whole lot of other things. Papakainga hasn't tended to be part of that conversation, generally speaking. It is and it isn't. It isn't because sometimes it's just too hard, you know, because you get the cross-cultural thing that sort of gets in the way. You're not quite sure whether, you know, what's tika and what's not tika. And I raised that partly from your presentation, Tikaha, around Te Ara Whakamua, the 5 principles that you raised. I suppose because I'm Māori and I like dealing this way, but I kind of like to define something first in Māori and then challenge other people to redefine it if they dare, kind of stuff, you know? Te Ara Whakamua is kind of saying that, you know, in the Papakainga sense, and I think that's a challenge not just for Pākehā, it's a challenge for Māori as well. We need to be challenging ourselves on those very things that kind of, on the one hand, are too hard to deal with, but on the other hand, are still causing angst or some, at least, degree of thinking. You know, so can we actually do it? Can we take that extra step? And I'd be interested in just any one of you, sort of response, I suppose, to the developing the thinking around Papakainga beyond housing, cultural activities, because that's what most people regard them as. I mean, it's quite a shift in thinking, I think, for a lot of people. But I kind of think that's one we shouldn't shy away from, even if at the end of the day they said, well, no, hang on, no, forget it. But until we do, you know, we kind of get caught up in a time warp, at least in my view.
I think there's, I mean, the mixed-use zone that's being proposed is one avenue, one area where there's opportunities. And I think it's the challenge is if you say, well, I'm going to tie the sort of core raw standards to the underlying zoning in terms of what you can do. And the mixed-use zone certainly offers those opportunities. There is provision in the proposed plan for some commercial. Yeah. It's relatively limited in its scale. Once again, I think if you were moving to a more urban environment in the right location, and that might be community facilities as well as commercial facilities, that could be perhaps challenging to manage through a planning system. Conversely, I think there is scope with the current commercial provisions that they do provide some leeway. That is not to say that you might default to restricted discretionary, for example, if you don't meet some of the standards for that and you've got a specific proposal as an element of that overall development that you have to work through, just in terms of having a look at that a little bit more closely. So I don't believe the way the provisions are structured that if you had an appropriate site and you were testing that, and from a functionality perspective it worked, but also it got through the planning assessment process, I don't see there's any reason that that would be a fatal flaw. But I think, yeah, it potentially could be quite challenging in some zones, particularly general residential, etc., to have that. But I think the district plan has got a reasonable starting point for commercial, and then really it would be dependent on the zoning that you were going into as to what you do and how you'd manage it. But it's a good concept, absolutely.
We're about 2.5 years young, and we've got a bit of a pipeline of work in front of us, and I think we're pretty progressive rōpū, and I think we might find our way potentially into that space. I know that some of our the 400 homes that we've got that are developing at the moment, a lot of that is based on some of the papakainga concept around communal kind of whanaungatanga, what type of tikanga will be kind of followed. So, I guess those are the view on some of our current developments, and maybe as we progress down the line, we might be able to kind of see how that looks. Of course, we've got our kahui kaumātua that would need to pass that by, but I think we might, it might be a progressive thing as we find our feet.
Is there anything else you want to add to your presentation, Te Kā? Because we haven't really talked about it. We've sort of touched on it intermittently.
I guess thanks for raising the kōrero about Te Ara Whakamua, which underpins our strategic framework for Mana Ahuriri Trust, and of course MALP, our limited holdings partnership company, is owned by Mana Ahuriri and sets the strategic direction. Maybe just re-emphasising our 5 key strategic goals in there. Whairawa, growing our assets, a big part of that. So we've shared some of the kōrero around how we intend to do that, and really important for us to have a strong economic base for delivering the likes of Ahurea Tuakiri, the connection of whānau to our whenua, so being culturally rich, connected to a lot of those sites that are in the Ahuriri station in Te Whanga. So, of course, being able to purchase Ahuriri station is really important to that connection. Whānau ora, our people thriving, so housing we know is a key core of that lays at the foundation of having a healthy, thriving whānau. Te Taiao, we're kind of mentioned, especially around the Ahuriri farm, the importance of the restoration of key parts of the Ahuriri farm, and of course rangatiratanga, which is one of the things that we're doing today and that we've done in the FDSs and taking the lead and driving forward in the direction of where we want to go and realising our strategy, but also the development of these sites. So that's our strategic direction. I think you can probably see that they're not just words on a paper, they're things that we're actively striving towards. And of course, it's to get better outcomes for our whānau and to realise those aspirations.
Yeah. If I could just return briefly to the comment I made about Te Reo. I suppose I have a question for you, Hapu, which is around all the stuff about unity and working together. But sometimes I look at it, but I'm struggling to see the Māori partner in some of this, the terminology and the way in which things are written, I guess. That's what I'm touching on. And it's more around the mana whenua chapter and stuff like that. But I think it bears thinking about. And I know we've gone a long way to use more tikanga phraseology and words and something like that. And and it was your 5 principles that really highlighted it for me, Te Kaha, when I said, why aren't we using those words? You know, that sort of stuff. And has that sort of thing ever occurred to you? Have you thought about it? And if you did, what would be your advice or commentary to the council?
The inclusion of kupu like these in the district plan?
Yeah.
Oh, tautoko. 100%. Tautoko, yeah, I guess if, you know, given the context of the kupu and making sure that that's clear and that, you know, that those are being actioned, I guess, and they're not just kupu on a page, there's something that, you know, is actively driven towards, then, yeah, absolutely. Tautoko, I think that would resonate well with the whānau, seeing kupu in there. And we do have our whanaunga morihu that leads the way, and I think the Reo Rua kaupapa is kind of making tracks, but yeah, completely tautoko mo a kupu Māori in the district plan would be great.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, Mana Ahiri supports Napier City Council in their reo strategy as well.
Yeah.
We've been part of that. They've involved us into that, and we're there to support that.
Cool.
Kia ora. Any more questions? Nope, that's good.
No, thank you.
Thank you. We've had a good presentation and a good discussion as an outcome, and it's been free-flowing, as you've said, but that's more helpful than... Thank you very much for that.
So have you bookended it now, have you?
Yeah, I've said, I think, all I need to say. We've got a little bit of homework.
Just a little.
And just, yeah, look, we thank the entire panel for their time.
Yeah.
Okay.
Ko te tira tēnei o mana ahuriri e mihi kāna kia koutou, tēnā koutou katoa.
Kia ora. Kia ora.
Accordingly, we will close day 1 of the hearing. Tomorrow we have a smaller panel, myself, Commissioners Van Volthausen, Brosnan and Commissioner Taylor, who's not here at the moment. And it's all about historic heritage and notable trees tomorrow, so a bit of a shift in focus. So thank you everyone for today, and thank you for your efforts and your attention, and we'll resume tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you.
Kia ora.
So I'll just finish us off in the way that we're accustomed to, and, which will round off today quite nicely in the context of what we've been talking about. So I'll just offer up a short prayer for us, finish off for today, and then wish everybody luck. So let us pray. E te atua kaharawa nāo mātou I arahi paitoro ngā ke o tēnei hui, tukuna mai tau manakitanga ki runga I a whānau katoa, e tau nei roto I tēnei whare, pai here tia wā tātou whānau I te wākainga, e hoki nei tātou ki te wākainga, manakitia moina o rātou, kia uru atu tātou katoa I tā orangatanga mutunga kore, runga I te ngō te matua o te tama, o te wairua tapu. Āmene.
Amen.
Kia ora.